Welcome to another episode of Sassy with Tessie. Today we are talking about safety behaviors, and it will mostly be a plea for you to include safety behaviors every time you do exposure therapy. So let's get started. So here you can see what we are going to discuss today. First of all, what are safety behaviors? What kind of safety behaviors exist? Why it is so important to include them, the but reason, and some tips to enhance it within your therapy practices. So first of all, what are safety behaviors? So safety behaviors are actually quite of a broad term for all behaviors that someone uses as a way of making the possibility of facing a disaster or harm as low as possible. And most of these behaviors are anxiety driven. And it can literally be every kind of behavior you can come up with besides avoidance. So avoidance, that's like a separate category, and then all the other ones are safety behaviors. And it's important to mention that safety behaviors are, in a lot of situations, very healthy to use and very recommended. So as you can see, here are some examples, such as wearing a belt when you hit the high road, wearing a condom if you're not planning to get pregnant, wearing a helmet when you're gonna drive through all kind of mountain roads. So there are a lot of behaviors we use on the daily to avoid possible life-threatening situation. And that's also exactly where the difference comes in between healthy safety behaviors and unhealthy safety behaviors, because we do face all kind of possible life-threatening situations daily, and we came up with all kind of behaviors to diminish possible disasters happening, which is great. However, we also use all kind of behaviors in situations that aren't life-threatening and that don't lead to a disaster. And then these behaviors can become very unhealthy, especially when we use them a lot and when we give the meaning to these behaviors that they are the reason that the disaster didn't happen. And I think it's not like a very black and white kind of thing that a safety behavior is definitely healthy or unhealthy. I think it's a continuum. Like, you can say that wearing a helmet while driving your bike through a busy city is kind of healthy, but wearing your helmet at home, we would say that might be a bit unhealthy. Asking for reassurance at your doctor if you just got a diagnosis that is possible life-threatening, it's very helpful and smart to ask for your reassurance, to ask for more information. But if you ask your partner 5 times after a social event, did I make a fool of myself? I'm such a loser. Am I a loser? Then it might become a bit unhealthy. So it depends on you as a person, on the client you have in front of you, whether we would consider safety behaviors as unhealthy or healthy. A different way of viewing safety behaviors within exposure therapy is to call them the second line of defense. This is also a term that is increasingly used within research to exposure therapy. So if you face this term, you at least know what it is. So here you can see it like in a picture. You have a person, you have the feared situation. Here it is like the world with all kind of warning signals, but it could be a party, it could be a dog, it could be all kind of bodily functions, whatever the person that you are seeing is very scared of and has an irrational fear of. The smartest way that anxiety can come up with is to avoid a situation. That way you are safest. Like, the point of anxiety, if we look at the function of the emotion anxiety, it is purely to keep someone safe. What is the safest bet is to keep someone at home or out of the feared situation. However, sometimes that's not possible. Like, if you have social anxiety, it might be the best from a place of your anxiety to not interact with humans at all. But that's not possible in our world. Same with it could be that it is possible to avoid, but that we don't want that. Like, we want to have relationships. We want to be able to walk to the city without fearing facing a dog. We want to travel. We want to form relationships. We want to be able to take the bus. So then we have a bit of trouble. There is a person who wants to face a feared situation. Avoiding is not possible. And to kind of lower that gap, the anxiety of people come up with all kinds of behaviors that are used to diminish the anxiety in these situations or to diminish the likelihood of a potential disaster. So you can picture it as this, like the second line of defense, but it would be better to see it like this. So the person does face the feared situation, but with all kinds of safety behaviors around it. So here you can see different categories of safety behaviors. So the first one is reassurance seeking. So for example, asking, are you sure that I didn't make a fool out of myself after you went to a friend's birthday? Another one is a person. So always taking a safe person with you. And that can sound like, I'm only going to the supermarket if my partner comes along with me. If he is not able to come with me, I won't go. It's too scary. Stuff and gadgets. I refer to this as the anxiety kit. So when I start exposure, I always ask, do you have an anxiety kit? And an anxiety kit is like all the things that you take with you whenever facing a feared situation. So stereotypical. Typically, it is a bit stereotypical. But for a lot of clients with anxiety disorder, this can be a bottle of water, like their safety medications, so like diazepam, oxazepam. It could be like a fully charged battery or an extra battery. It could be certain clothes, a lucky underwear, always having to have your glasses. So all these kind of things together, you can refer to them as the anxiety kit. Then we have timing and place. So that's someone only wants to face a feared situation at a specific time or at a certain place. So I only go to the supermarket when it is 8 in the morning, or I'm only going with the bus when it is like at the daytime and it's not very busy. Another one is preparation. And there is a draw, like I think also on a continuum between healthy preparing and overly preparing. So for example, if someone like learns for an exam but just overly does it, or when someone is has to have a meeting at work and like the whole night you're just preparing the same presentation over and over and over again, or like coming up with all kind of imaginable storylines before going to a party. There's a line that can be drawn between what is healthy and helpful and when does it become unhealthy. Mental rituals, just repeating certain numbers or repeating certain sentences, and all kind of others. And I put the breathing exercises in that as well, because if we look at, for example, panic disorder treatment, using breathing exercises can actually become a form of safety behaviors, where someone comes up with the conclusion that they can only face a panic attack while using all kind of breathing exercises, which is not true. Like a panic, it gives the wrong meaning afterwards. Like, I only survived this panic attack because I used my breathing exercises. Well, the proper meaning should be, I survived my panic attack because a panic attack isn't dangerous. It's uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous. And giving that wrong meaning can reinforce a panic disorder. So that's in the others category. So it's interesting. Might ask yourself the question, hey, which safety behaviors do I use? Which can I observe in my clients? And let's talk about why it is so important to include them always in exposure therapy. So why is it so important to include safety behaviors whenever you do exposure therapy with clients? And it's mostly because of the but reason. And the but reason has everything to do with giving the wrong meaning to what is happening. So exposure therapy typically is about the client facing the feared situation to learn that the disaster won't happen, or that if the disaster happened, they can cope with it. And when someone faces those fear situations with all kinds of safety behaviors, those safety behaviors, the anxiety of clients is often very, very smart. It kind of uses those safety behaviors to say, yeah, but the only reason that disaster didn't happen is because you used those safety behaviors. So let's look at some specific examples. Yeah, going to the supermarket went well this time, but if I go on a busy time, for example, Saturday morning, then the disaster will happen. Yeah, I went to the cinema, but I had my emergency oxazepam with me. If I can't bring them next time, the disaster will happen. Yes, the presentation went very well, but only because I prepared so well. Yeah, I took a picture of the stove, but if I can't do that anymore, how do I know that I turned off the stove? Or in other words, the client's anxious side very smartly uses these safety behaviors as a way of explaining why a certain disaster didn't happen. It was because of the smart use of the safety behaviors, rather than getting to the right conclusion that the disaster didn't happen because it is not likely to happen. So in the base, the right behaviors facing the situation, breaking avoidance, will lead to the wrong conclusions because of that safety behaviors. And that's actually really, really sad, because breaking avoidance can be really hard for clients to do. And here you can see some examples about that wrong conclusion. So the wrong conclusion will be the disaster didn't happen because of my safety behaviors. And that is very anxious-driven explanation, and it is just old conditioning. It's still reinforcing this idea that the situation is dangerous and that disasters will happen. The right conclusion would be the disaster didn't happen because it is not likely to happen. And even when it happens, I can manage it. That is like the whole point of exposure therapy, is you want to get that new brain part very reinforced. And that is also safety learning. A client can learn, oh, this situation is safe because it is a safe situation, regardless of which kind of safety behaviors I come up with. And the sad part is that as a consequence, it could be that the anxiety disorder isn't diminishing, that a client is working really hard to face all these situations and still feel that the anxiety disorder isn't really diminishing, or we see that after treatment stops, it kind of relapses very soon, in a very rapid tempo. So I already talked about the effects of including safety behaviors throughout this video, but let's list them shortly. So first, the if-then or the US-UR expectation becomes less believable. So the old pathway is less reinforced, the new pathway becomes more reinforced, and simply put, the anxious side of your client will run out of evidence. There is less evidence after these exposures without safety behaviors to convince the client that a disaster is likely to happen. And that's what we want with the therapy. You want to form that new pathway and make the old pathway less believable for the client. Secondly, new pathways are formed. Thirdly, the healthy side of clients becomes stronger, because it is often a very boost for the self-confidence when they can face these situations without safety behaviors, without avoidance, and it will strengthen the healthy side, and it enables clients that their anxious side can still be there, but is not the one calling the shots. And I find this a very important one. If you use like the second line of defense, if you use the term safety behaviors over and over, clients start to understand themselves how their anxiety is reinforced even while they're still facing situations, and why facing their anxiety until now hasn't led to the desired results. And this is extremely important, for example, with clients with social anxiety who often come to therapy and say, yeah, but I face social interactions. I speak to people and still my anxiety is there. Often this has to do with safety behaviors because clients only broke that first line of defense. And last but not least is that clients get a more diffused or playful relationship with their anxiety and with their anxious side. So I always refer to their anxiety as your anxiety, your anxious side. Where does your anxious side come up with? And clients start to get diffused from this idea that they are their anxiety. A whole list of reasons to include them. The if-then expectation becomes less, new pathways are formed, the healthy side of clients becomes stronger. Clients will understand why they have to face situations without safety behaviors and why facing their situations hasn't had the right effect until now, and they get a more diffuse, playful relationship with their anxiety. Then some practical tips of how to include safety behaviors within therapy. When I treat a client for anxiety, doesn't matter what type of anxiety or what the anxiety triggers are, upfront in the case conceptualization, I always make a list with the client of their safety behaviors. I explain at the moment what are safety behaviors. I list the different categories and they can say, oh, I do that, I do that. Often it's a very important moment in the therapy where clients become aware of their safety behaviors. And if you notice that this is really the first time clients start to acknowledge their safety behaviors, you can also do a little registration exercise where you ask clients, hey, the next week, can you list how often you use these type of safety behaviors? Another way to include them, that's one is listed here, is include them in all your exposure forms. So we know by now that a very helpful part of exposure therapy is not only facing a situation, but also giving the right meaning to it afterwards. So the cognitive component of cognitive behavioral therapy. And what helps is that before, like when I come up with an exposure or the client comes up with an exposure, we always discuss upfront what kind of safety behaviors you think you're going to use. And this can be very helpful for the client to kind of get that insight. Hey, what would my anxiety come up with? And also to get in an agreement about, okay, you think you want to use these type of safety behaviors, which are allowed and which not. Also, when we discuss afterwards the effect of exposure, I always ask my clients, which safety behaviors did you want to use and which did you actually use? And to see if it has an effect on the conclusion. Sometimes it has and sometimes it doesn't, but it's important to always include them. Another way is to talk in diffusing language. I've done that already throughout this video, but I find that such a helpful way in the exposure therapy. So sentences that I use a lot are like, where did your anxiety come up with to protect you this time? Do we have new safety behaviors? Was it something old that we already know? Another one is like referring to anxiety as a smartass. I often call it like some kind of Einstein or James Bond who's just very clever and can just smooch in without a client really noticing it. So a way is like, yay, your anxiety is such a smartass. It has probably come up with something very creative to lower the anxiety when you face the feared situation. What could it be? So you can use diffusing language. So you can refer to it as your anxiety, your anxious side, the second line of defense. You can also give it a name. I visited the Moco Museum in Amsterdam and I saw a collection of Robbie Williams, the singer there, and he had one of these as one of the art pieces, which kind of sums up the diffusing part of therapy. So give it a name. And the last tip is to make agreements with your clients about which safety behaviors they can use and which they can't use in the exposure. And you can change that. Of course, it would be best to work towards zero because then the safety behaviors can't reinforce those old pathways. But keeping clients in exposure therapy is also very important, and following the motivation of clients. So it's okay to coach them and to explain it, but in the end, make an agreement. And it looks a bit like exposure with response prevention in that way. So there was a lot of information about safety behaviors, and the whole video is just a plea for you to start including safety behaviors always, so that you can enhance your practice and the effectivity of your exposure therapy. And it doesn't really matter in which way you do that, as long as you do it. If you have any questions about safety behaviors within exposure therapy, drop them in the comment section and I'll do my best to answer them. And otherwise, I wish you a very good day. Bye!